I gave up the life we built for years to save my younger brother, but my fiancé said, "You made your choice, now forget my name." I still can't believe this month ended the way it did. Too fast, too painful, too messy. Just 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in my favorite armchair in Jacob's in my living room, looking at the ring he gave me for Christmas, and planning our wedding. Not a grand one, but ours, cozy, just family and close friends. We were the perfect couple. I'm 32, he's 35. We both worked in IT, he as a developer, I as an analyst. We'd lived together for 5 years, bought this house on the outskirts of Sacramento, and done the renovation we always dreamed of. The house wasn't just ours. It was a symbol proof that we had finally broken free from the garbage we grew up in. Jacob came from a poor background, and I came from a family where all the money went to the treatment and care of my younger brother, Ethan. Ethan, that's where the real hell begins. He's 20, and he has a severe form of muscular dystrophy. He can't walk independently and needs constant help with almost everything. He has always been under the care of my mother and me. From the moment Jacob entered my life, he knew about Ethan. He knew that Ethan was a part of me, part of my responsibility, and that I would never leave him. When we first moved in together, I made it clear. My family is a package deal, and Ethan is the central piece of that package. Jacob nodded, then hugged me and said we would manage. I believed him. How foolish I was. In the last 2 years, my mother, Sarah, started getting weaker. She's 60 now, and the constant physical labor of caring for Ethan was literally killing her. Doctors told her she needed to reduce her workload, or her heart wouldn't be able to handle it. So Jacob and I decided to hire a full-time caregiver, but it turned out to be prohibitively expensive. Our mortgage, his car loan, my student debt, we were barely making ends meet. We decided the only way was to sell his small studio apartment, which he was renting out, to cover the caregiver's costs. Jacob gritted his teeth but agreed, saying it was temporary until we got back on our feet. Ethan couldn't suffer. Everything started to crumble when Jacob was offered a job in Vancouver. Not just a job, but a dream position with a salary that would allow us to not just live, but live without the constant fear of bills. He came home beaming, as if he had won the lottery. "Kate, this is our chance. We're leaving in a month. For weeks. This changes everything." I listened to him and my head was spinning. Vancouver. A different country. I tried to stay calm. "Jacob, that's amazing. But, Ethan. What about Ethan? We can't just abandon him." He waved me off like an annoying fly. "We'll take him with us. He'll get the best medical care there, Kate. A better life." I didn't know then that this was the first, subtlest, most polite hint that he actually didn't care. I started researching Canadian immigration laws. The immigration process for someone with such a severe illness as Ethan's is not just difficult. It's practically impossible. Canadian Immigration Services can deny entry if they deem that the medical costs for a disabled person would become an excessive burden on their healthcare system. It's called medical inadmissibility. I found 10 stories of people who were rejected for this very reason. 10 stories that tore my soul apart because each one could easily become ours. When I showed these articles to Jacob, his face first paled, then turned to stone. "You don't want to go, do you?" he asked so coldly that I felt an icy stab in my chest. "I do, Jacob, but we have to be realistic. If we leave and I can't take Ethan, he will be placed in a state-run care facility because of Mom's condition. You know what that means. It's a slow death. I can't allow that." And that's when he dropped the line that is forever etched in my memory, shattering all my illusions about our life and our years together. I was standing in the kitchen, holding a mug of cold tea, and he standing in the doorway threw these words at me like stones. "I am not going to live for your family. I'm going to live for us, for our future. Make a choice, Kate. It's now or never." I knew he was bluffing, that he was just scared. But something broke inside me. I looked at him, the man I loved, and saw a stranger. For weeks until departure. And this ultimatum. A choice between my future and my brother's life. The next morning felt like walking through thick, freezing fog. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and metallic, tasting like blood. I avoided Jacob's eyes over breakfast. He was flipping pancakes with an almost aggressive enthusiasm, the silence between us louder than any shouting match. I saw the facade. He was pretending everything was fine, that I just needed a day to get over my emotional reaction. He thought this was just a typical relationship hurdle, something we jump over with a compromise. He didn't get it. This wasn't about buying a different brand of coffee. This was existential. I retreated to my home office, ostensibly to work on spreadsheets, but really to just breathe without his suffocating presence nearby. I opened the immigration forum again, scrolling past hopeful success stories until I found the grim ones. I needed facts, not feelings, to anchor myself against the rising tide of panic. I calculated the exact cost of long-term, specialized, private care for Ethan in Vancouver versus what we paid here in Sacramento, factoring in the exchange rate and the difference in insurance coverage for non-citizens. The numbers were terrifying. Even if we could get him in, the out-of-pocket expenses would consume 80% of Jacob's projected new salary before taxes. It would mean no house payments, no savings, and certainly no travel. We'd be trading one kind of financial stress for a much larger, more morally compromised version of it. I finally called my older cousin Mark, who had moved to Toronto years ago and worked in corporate law. Mark was always the pragmatic one, the one who saw the angles. I kept the story vague. Just a potential cross-border move and a family member with complex medical needs. Mark listened patiently, his voice calm and measured, the perfect foil to my frayed nerves. "Kate," he said after I finished, "be honest with me. How secure is Ethan's current status if you leave? Does your mother have power of attorney? Is there a formal guardianship arrangement?" I hesitated. Mom has POA for medical decisions, obviously, but guardianship? No. We never thought we'd need one. If she physically can't care for him and I'm gone, yes, the state steps in. They'd evaluate him. It wouldn't be ideal. A place like the Sierra Vista facility. It's clean but impersonal. It's institutional. Mark was quiet for a long moment. The Canadian system, they don't look at your good intentions, Kate. They look at liability. If they see guardianship proceedings being set up, or your mother's declining health documented, they'll flag it immediately. They'll see a ticking time bomb of dependency. You need to secure Ethan's status here first, before any application goes in, or you're wasting the filing fee. His advice, though sound, felt like a death sentence for the Vancouver plan. Securing permanent, state-backed long-term care for Ethan in California required refiling several specific disability and dependency forms. It meant opening up our finances even further, showing everything. All of Jacob's stock options, my salary history, Mom's meager retirement, to prove we couldn't manage, that the state had to step in as a last resort. It was an admission of failure, a public declaration that we were bankrupting ourselves by trying to do the right thing for Ethan. And it would take time. 6 months minimum for the paperwork to be processed correctly. 6 months we didn't have, because Jacob had already signed the preliminary agreement with the Canadian company, effective in 4 weeks. When Jacob came into the office around lunchtime, he wasn't enthusiastic anymore. He was tense. He saw the laptop screen, the paperwork for the California Social Services review was open. "What is this, Kate? I told you we're leaving. Stop playing with this stuff. We're going to Canada, and we'll figure out Ethan when we get there. We'll hire the best private nurse money can buy." His voice was dangerously low. I finally looked him in the eye. The emotion was raw, unfiltered desperation mixed with fury. "You don't get it, Jacob. We can't hire the best nurse on your salary and pay the mortgage on this house, which we still need to sell slowly, or we lose thousands. And even if we could, Canada says no." Mark confirmed it. "If we don't settle Ethan's care structure here before we apply, we risk immediate refusal. This isn't a vacation. This is my brother's life. You want to live our life? Fine. But that life has to include the reality of who I am. I can't just pack him up like old luggage." His face contorted, the easygoing developer persona completely gone. "So that's it then? You choose him over me? You choose poverty and obligation over the actual future we promised each other? This is insane. You are sacrificing everything, our money, our careers, our happiness, for a situation that you can't control anyway." He slammed his hand on the desk, making my monitor jump. "I worked my ass off for this chance, Kate. I didn't do it so you could keep pouring every spare dime into a medical black hole." The venom in his words shocked me into silence. He wasn't angry about the logistics. He was angry that my loyalty wasn't exclusively to him. That was the core of it. The anger felt like the foundation of our entire 5-year relationship cracking right under my feet. I realized with chilling certainty that if I let him convince me now, I'd spend the rest of my life feeling like I was owing him for choosing my brother. The silence from the lunch hour only amplified the dread. I spent the afternoon calling lawyers specializing in disability trust funds, trying to find a fast-track solution that didn't involve exposing our entire financial portfolio to the state assessors immediately. Every lawyer quoted 6 weeks just to draft the preliminary documents, assuming no immediate challenges. I looked at the calendar. 4 weeks left until the supposed move date. 4 weeks to either convince Jacob to postpone his career-defining opportunity or convince myself to abandon my brother to an institution I spent my entire adult life fighting against. When Jacob finally came back into the living room that evening, he wasn't yelling anymore. That would have been easier to fight against. Instead, he was clinically cold, sorting through stacks of moving boxes we'd optimistically purchased 2 weeks prior. He was packing his things, not our things, just his office equipment and his expensive espresso machine, with unnerving efficiency. "I spoke to my recruiter this afternoon, Kate," he stated, carefully wrapping a set of network cables. "I told them the start date needs to be pushed back by at least 4 months. I gave them a vague story about unforeseen family medical complications requiring personal attention." I felt a sudden sharp rush of hope, quickly followed by suspicion. "And? What did they say?" He didn't look up. "They were polite. They understood. They emphasized that this is a high-demand role, and any further delay might mean losing the offer to the runner-up. They gave me 2 weeks to confirm the new start date. If I push it past November 30th, they walk." This was it. The moment of truth stripped bare of all pretense. He hadn't come to me to negotiate. He had come to inform me that he had taken the unilateral first step towards staying, but only on a rapidly shrinking deadline that put all the pressure back on me. He was essentially saying, "I bent, but only slightly. Now you break." 2 weeks, Jacob? You told them we might be delayed by 4 months? That's not asking for time. That's setting up a fallback plan for staying without me. My voice was tight, fighting to remain level. "We still haven't solved the core issue. We don't know if Ethan can immigrate, and if he can't, we have to prepare the state guardianship papers. That process takes 6 months minimum. If we wait, we lose the house sale contingency, and we risk losing the Canadian offer entirely if we try to delay again." He finally dropped the cables, stood up, and faced me. His eyes were hard, betraying the years of shared history. "I don't care about the house contingency, Kate. I care about my career, which we agreed was the key to fixing the financial hole. And I am done waiting for paperwork that might never come through, or arguing with bureaucrats about whether my fiancé's dependent brother is worth the premium coverage." The word dependent hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just about the money. It was about how he perceived Ethan, as an obstacle, a drain, a mathematical error in his life equation. "He is not a premium coverage, Jacob. He's my brother." I yelled, the control finally snapping. "He needs help. Do you think I like having this weight? Do you think I enjoy sacrificing my freedom for someone who can't feed himself? This is my life. This is the contract I signed when I was 12 and my father left us with Mom in a wheelchair." "Exactly," he shot back, stepping closer, invading my space. "You signed that contract 12 years ago. I signed up for a partnership now. You are still living in 2010, drowning in obligations to people who are perfectly capable of making arrangements without you destroying my one shot at a real life. If you stay here, you are choosing to stay broke, struggling, and resentful. And I will not marry a resentful woman who forces me into an indefinite wait." The air crackled between us. It wasn't a fight about logistics anymore. It was a battle for my identity versus his vision of our shared future. "So you're giving me an ultimatum inside the ultimatum?" I whispered, feeling completely hollowed out. "If I don't get the state to approve permanent care for Ethan in the next 2 weeks, which is impossible, you walk away from the job and from me?" He stared at me, his jaw tight. "No. If you don't commit right now to selling the house, applying for the guardianship papers today, and accepting that if the Canadian application gets denied, we still leave Ethan with the state-approved care, then I walk. I take the job offer as soon as they let me, and you can join me when you finally prioritize our life." I'm not going to be held hostage by bureaucracy or guilt. I want a life, Kate. A real one. I can't keep waiting for you to grow up and realize that sometimes you have to cut the dead weight to keep the main structure standing. The dead weight comment, aimed directly at my brother, was the hardest thing I had ever heard. I felt the world tilt. He wasn't bluffing. He was ready to dismantle 5 years and an engagement because my loyalty extended beyond his immediate desires. I had 2 weeks to make a legal decision that would seal Ethan's fate, a decision that had to be made under the crushing weight of knowing that saying no to his terms meant ending the relationship. The tension was so thick I could barely draw a breath. The next 7 days were a blur of false starts and increasing desperation. I signed the initial petitions for the state guardianship review, the papers already feeling heavy with finality. Every signature was a small funeral for the Jacob and Kate in Vancouver dream. I barely spoke to him. When we did communicate, it was about logistics. Did you call the realtor? The insurance paperwork is on your desk. We were cohabiting roommates managing a hostile takeover of a shared asset, not a couple planning a wedding. The tension was a high-pitched whine ready to snap. Jacob, sensing my compliance with the preliminary legal steps, started acting slightly warmer, beginning to discuss which neighborhood he thought would be best for our new life in Canada, assuming I'd eventually cave completely on the timeline. He misinterpreted my necessary administrative actions as capitulation to his demands, not as a tactical move to secure the best possible outcome for Ethan in case I had to leave him behind. It was day 12 of the 2-week ultimatum. I was sitting with my mother, Sarah, in her small, cluttered kitchen. We were reviewing the forms I'd brought over for her signature, the ones authorizing the state to step in if I left the country. She kept her hand steadying my pen, but her eyes were distant. She knew what this meant. She'd always seen herself as my safety net, and now I was actively setting up the last resort she hoped to avoid. "Are you sure you can't find a way, sweetie?" she whispered, her voice thin. "Maybe I can hire someone part-time until you settle?" "Mom, stop. We talked about this. You can barely lift the shower chair now. If you fall, who helps Ethan?" "No. This paperwork protects him. It's a backup." I tried to sound firm, but the lie tasted bitter. It was the only backup plan and Jacob knew it. That afternoon, I decided I couldn't trust any lawyers or paperwork timelines anymore. I needed to know the absolute worst-case scenario for Ethan if Jacob left and if the state took over, so I could present it as an undeniable barrier. I drove to the Sierra Vista facility under the pretense of dropping off some donation books. I needed to see the reality of the slow death he'd dismissed. The facility was clean, sterile, and quiet, too quiet. I asked to see the high-needs wing. The nurse, a kind woman named Brenda, showed me around. It was organized chaos. I saw Ethan's potential reality. Rows of specialized beds, the smell of disinfectant, and the dull, vacant looks on the faces of residents who hadn't had regular, loving contact in months. I felt my own breath hitching. This was the line I absolutely could not cross. Brenda showed me a room set aside for residents awaiting complex, state-funded placements. "This room," she said, pointing to an empty, albeit large, space, "it's currently vacant. We have an opening. If you sign the final placement agreement now, we can process Ethan in 3 days. We'd waive the typical 6-month wait because of the documented urgent medical need of the primary caregiver, your mother." I froze. 3 days. Not 6 months. The bureaucracy, which I thought was my enemy, was offering me a fast track, but the cost was immediate and irrevocable surrender of my parental/sibling responsibility to the state. The key was Sarah's documented inability to care for him. I rushed back home, heart hammering against my ribs. I had the solution to save Ethan if Jacob left. But there was a catch, a nasty, unforgiving one that hit me when I saw a familiar unopened cardboard box tucked behind the coat rack. A box Jacob had explicitly told me not to touch because it contained his expensive limited edition graphics card needed for the new development job. The box was slightly warped on one side. Curiosity, born of panic and suspicion, overrode my respect for his boundaries. I ripped the packing tape. Inside, nestled beneath layers of bubble wrap, was not just the graphics card, but a small zippered leather pouch. Inside the pouch were 3 passports. Jacob's, a woman named Chloe's, and a 7-year-old boy named Leo's. All Canadian passports, all recently renewed. My hand started shaking so violently, I almost dropped the passports onto the hardwood floor. My mind immediately leaped to the implications. Jacob hadn't just been offered a job in Vancouver. He had a life waiting there. He wasn't trying to start a new future with me. He was trying to integrate me and Ethan into a future that already included a wife and a son he hadn't mentioned for 5 years. The job offer wasn't the risk. It was the final piece of paperwork needed to establish residency for his existing family. My shared future was a complete, well-constructed lie. A smokescreen to see if I was pliable enough to simply abandon my life and slide into the role of Kate, the perfect Canadian stepmother. The ultimatum wasn't about choosing him over Ethan. It was about him choosing his real family over the one he'd been pretending to build with me. The passports felt like lead weights in my hand. Chloe Leo Vancouver, it was a parallel universe I was never meant to enter. The realization didn't bring explosive rage. It brought a terrifying, crystalline clarity. Jacob hadn't been stressed about my indecision. He'd been stressed about the ticking clock on his ability to quietly absorb me into his pre-existing life before his estranged family situation became a legal liability for his Canadian employment. The dead weight comment was his way of preemptively justifying why he had to prioritize Chloe and Leo if I proved too much of a logistical burden. The entire engagement was contingent on my willingness to become a clean slate, erasing my past, Ethan included, to fit his narrative. I placed the passports neatly back into the pouch, zipped it, and set it back into the box exactly as I found it. Then I took the signed guardianship papers for Ethan, the ones I'd prepared for my mother, and tucked them into my briefcase. The administrative task was done. I had secured Ethan's safety net, not as a bargaining chip, but as my necessary exit strategy. Jacob walked in exactly 10 minutes later, looking expectant, already wearing his "we resolved this" smile. He was holding 2 glasses of expensive whiskey, a peace offering he clearly thought would smooth over the next inevitable step, signing the paperwork to list the house for immediate sale, effectively abandoning the complex, slow process of selling it through a realtor. "Look, Kate, I know this has been rough," he began, handing me 1 glass. "But we're clear now, right? We list the house tomorrow. We give ourselves 1 month to sort the final paperwork for Ethan here, and if it doesn't clear by the 30th, we accept the care facility. It's the only sane way forward. I can't jeopardize my start date anymore." I took the whiskey. The liquid burned, but it didn't numb the core certainty that had crystallized inside me. I looked at the man I thought I'd spend my life with. He was handsome, successful, and utterly ruthless when his ambition was challenged. "I've already handled the guardianship papers, Jacob," I said, my voice perfectly level, devoid of the tremor that used to betray me. "Mom signed them this morning. As of today, Ethan is officially under state review for placement, pending my confirmed departure from the U.S. The process should finalize within 3 days, as Brenda at Sierra Vista confirmed." His smile vanished. The whiskey glass almost slipped from his hand. You went ahead without discussing the final decision? Kate, this is insane. You just signed away your brother." "No," I corrected him softly, taking a slow sip. "I signed papers to ensure he is safe in case I couldn't protect him myself. That was always the necessary evil. What I actually did today was finalize my decision about us." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the coffee table, making sure he had to look directly at me, truly see me for the first time in weeks. "I went to Sierra Vista, Jacob. I saw the rooms. I saw the quiet. I know exactly what I was sacrificing, and I accepted it to protect my family. But I looked at the alternative, your path, and realized that was the real death sentence." His face contorted into the expression I'd seen when I questioned his job offer, but magnified by betrayal. "You found out, didn't you? About Chloe and Leo? That's why you're acting like this. You're throwing everything away because of a stupid old secret." "It wasn't a secret, Jacob. It was an entire life you concealed. A life that proves you view me as highly disposable. You never intended for me to come to Vancouver. You intended for me to step into the role of the dutiful caregiver who sacrifices everything, including her self-respect, to facilitate your relocation with your real family. You didn't want a wife. You wanted an incredibly competent, unpaid support system for your brother. And if that became too hard, You had a pre-packed exit strategy with a mother and child waiting. I pushed the glass of whiskey toward him. Drink this, Jacob. You'll need it. Because you need to call your recruiter back. Tell them the offer is off the table. Tell them you're staying in Sacramento. Tell them you're staying to deal with the consequences of what you just did to my trust. He gaped, speechless. You think I'll stay here? After this? After you deliberately sabotaged my timeline? I don't think anything about what you want anymore, I stated. I think about what I need. I need a clean break. You have 2 days to pack your things, Jacob. I'm keeping the house for now to ensure Ethan has stability while the state processes his transfer to a quality care system. One I will personally oversee. I will not be resented for my obligation, and I will not be controlled by your ambition. He stood there, defeated, the whiskey untouched. He didn't argue about the house. He knew I had the leverage now. He knew I had seen the real blueprint of his life. He just stood there, the successful IT developer suddenly looking like a small, scared man who had gambled everything on a perfect deception and lost in the final hour. So that's it? He finally managed, his voice cracking. All those years. Just gone over a lie? I looked around our living room, the room where we had laughed, planned, and dreamed. It suddenly felt like a stage set collapsing around me. Not gone, Jacob. They were never real. They were built on the premise that I would be less than I am, less responsible, less loving toward my family. You wanted a simplified life. I gave you a complex one. That's the core conflict. You see responsibility as weight. I see it as definition. I walked to the front door and opened it, letting the cool Sacramento night air rush in. Go. Figure out your future with Chloe and Leo. I'll figure out mine with Ethan. They are both lives built on truth, finally. He picked up his box of cables slowly, his shoulders slumped. He didn't look back as he walked out into the dark. I closed the door. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was vast. I walked over to Ethan's room, sat by his bedside, and just watched him sleep, the ventilator softly hissing a steady rhythm. It took 1 month for everything to shatter, but in that shattering I didn't lose my brother. I finally found myself. The cost was immense, a lost engagement, a ruined house sale, and the immediate reality of an institutional future for Ethan, but the currency I paid with was not my soul, but a beautiful empty illusion. Some cages are built of steel, others are built of promises. I just chose the stronger locks.